his guide, and whomsoever Allah allows to go astray, none can guide him. I bear witness that there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah alone, with no partners, and I bear witness that Muhammad is his servant and his messenger. O our Lord, expand our chests for us, ease our affairs, and untie the knots from our tongues, so that those present may understand our words. Amen.
Good morning, everybody. We are going to try and keep to time, so
recording in progress.
If we can try and put our phones on silent, if that's possible, and we will start with the first speaker. Could I ask you to come up and I'll introduce you? Slept well? Oh dear me, we're still sleeping. Come on. Now, Ade was meant to do some exercises this morning. So it's really, I don't care. Let's get some energy in the room for a second or two. Can't let you off. Thank you.
All right, so we're not doing exercises as such, but we are going to do what's called an icebreaker. I had 2 icebreakers planned, so I may not be able to do one because we're in 2024. I'm going to try and see if we can do it. Do you all have coins in your pocket? Is it? See? That's what I'm saying. So no, we can't do that one. No Bitcoin? Anyone have Bitcoin? Anyone want to share Bitcoin with me? Okay. All right, here's what I want you to do. This is going to require you to stand up. So we're going to take 3 minutes. I want you to find someone in the room who you do not know yet. Tell them your name, tell them where you're from, and tell them your hopes for this conference. 3 minutes. And go.
Sorry to catch you.
No, that's fine.
Give me a second.
take about 1 more minute and wrap up your conversation. If you could start wrapping up the conversation and heading back to your seat. If you can hear my voice, clap once. If you can hear my voice, clap twice. If you can hear my voice, clap 3 times. All right, let's make our ways back to our seat.
Right, good morning, everybody. That's a nice icebreaker warm-up. Good. I don't have to jump around. So, when I came to Kenya in 2017, by 2018, people were talking a lot about historical land injustices. And I'd heard something about it before, but really it came into sharp focus when I arrived. And within a few months, people said, you need to speak to the National Land Commission. I was like, who's the National Land Commission? Okay, well, you're lucky because you've got the National Land Commission here today. So, and you will hear directly from our keynote speaker, Ms. Nguku, who is the Vice Chair of the National Land Commission, what they do, what they've done, what they propose to do. And without going into any detail, it is parastatal, which is specifically directed to allow Kenyans to redress issues of land injustice, historical and current. And therefore, it plays a singularly, really central role in sorting out the mess the British left. So just to give one little example, which I mentioned in passing yesterday, between about until 1920, Kenya was a protectorate. Supposedly before 1920, the British you are you where you were living, but they did. In fact, they did more than that. They cleared out whole communities, ethnic groups, all sorts of nonsense. So by the time the Colonies Act occurred in 1920, things were set in place for ethnic cleansing on a massive scale. The consequences of this are something that Gertrude has the responsibility to deal with. So can I ask you to give a very warm welcome to our keynote speaker and hopefully join the panel, Ms. Gertrude Nguku of the National Land Commission.
Thank you very much, Judge Peter. And thank you everybody in the room and those who are listening online, my African brothers and sisters in the diaspora from Kenya and elsewhere in the world. Asante sana. It's an honor to speak to you this morning, not because I want to teach you anything you don't know, but because I want to raise some issues for our discussion here today, or even in the different platforms where we find ourselves, wherever we are coming from. Now, my topic is very interesting. Whose land is this anyway? Now, if you are talking to a pastoralist in Kenya, like a Borana or a Maasai or a Samburu or a Pokot, he'll tell you, and these are words I picked from somewhere, somebody was being interviewed, and he says, this land cannot belong to anyone. It belongs to all of us. That was the culture. Now, land in our African traditional communities used to belong, was not a regulator. He was not a proprietor, like what was introduced here by the British. He did not have the crown title. He was there to protect, first of all, the community interests at the clan, family, and community level, and secondly, to make sure that the resources were sustainable. Now, if I ask, whose land is this anyway? Somebody working with the government. This one is a quote of a KFC Ranger. He says, okay, if government wanted to dealt with it a long time ago, end of quotes, is waiting for the government to take charge. Now, what if I ask somebody else, like somebody who is doing conservation? I've read Cook Kuhlman. She's read. The daughter is trying to carry out the legacy in Laikipia, where they have several thousands of acres of land, and they are conservation. And then she will tell you, I feel a I feel that if I let it go, people will subdivide it, and it will become a desert, because the desert is moving towards the south. Now that brings in other issues of climate justice I will touch on briefly. And now, if I ask a Pan-Africanist, like Fathio Kobu, I don't know who has come across him, is in the justice transition space. Maybe some of you have watched him online or even met him. He will tell you that Africa has to come up with its own strategic vision on how to use their own land and resources, because if they don't, nobody else is going to do it for you. They'll only have their own vision. Now, with that in mind, let's discuss whose land is it anyway. First of all, our constitution is very clear, the current one. Now, whether it is applied or not is another question altogether. It's very progressive. It says that land in Kenya belongs to the people of Kenya. It no longer belongs to the crown. It belongs to the people of Kenya collectively and individually as a nation, communities, and individuals. Now, what happened, as Peter was saying in the introduction, is that a lot happened before the colonial era, a lot happened after the colonial era. 10 million acres of land were taken away from the original inhabitants, and then it was given to the colonialists. At independence, we adopted the culture where the ruler became the proprietor and the legislator, not the protector. Although the Constitution, of course, was talking about public interests. But the culture, let's notice that the paradigms is this: I am in charge, so I have the power to take the land. Okay? So that is the context within which we are having this discussion. So consequently, land consolidation, resettlement, adjudication, and even currently the injustice redress mechanisms have been influenced by that culture. So I don't know how many lawyers we have in the room. A lot, I imagine. I used to be one of them in another lifetime. Now, you find that the very restrictive way of looking at law and looking at reforms from a legal perspective, it can be very limiting. Actually, it can be very irresponsible, I'm sorry to say, because in the defense of a title, then we overlook the context of development, livelihoods, social, cultural, and other important issues. So I'm going to just pick 3 cases to illustrate historical displacement, secondly, economical displacement, and lastly, climate justice displacement. Yes, it's happening already in a big way. Now, historical displacement. If you speak to a 6-year-old Mike, he will tell you that they brought development to Kenya. He's the 3rd generation immigrant in Kenya from South Africa. His family came here before 1800, actually before colonial era, and they were given 5,000 acres of land in Central Province, and he says, the Kambas, that is the community where I come from, were far in the east, and the Maasais were far in the north, and the Kikuyus were far in the west. So it was no man's land. So he will tell you, it is his land, okay? And then they heked a living to the extent where they brought pineapples from South Africa. The first president of Kenya gave them 2,000 acres in what Kenyans know as Del Monte. It used to be Kenya Canas. And he will tell you they hired a lot of people, and he means well. In 2015, the National Land Commission receives a claim from Kandara residents of this area, and they say they claim gross violation by Del Monte Company that included violent evictions, displacement, torture, maiming, and gender-based violence. So the commission determines that the Minister of Land should resurvey this land, and if there is some of it which is not in official records, then it should be given to these residents. As of to date, I doubt if this has been implemented, because when I looked up the latest, I saw that the Kenya National Human Rights Commission has issued a release that was in 2020, claiming that the resurvey by the Ministry of Lands, the Del Monte Company, the county governments of Kiambu and Murang'a has been illegal because they have failed to include and protect the interests of the community. That's where we are at. Now, let's look at displacement because of economic development. I'll give you a case which is on my desk right now. A task force has been constituted of the Ministry of Infrastructure, the county government of Mozambique, to look at issues for 2 reasons. And I want you to reflect on that. That is the context of where we are in Kenya and in Africa. To protect the investor and to protect the government from risk. Now, what is this case about? Land in Mozambique was trust land, is trust land, which has transited to community land. Now, what this entailed was that the 150,000 acres which have been taken by Turkana Wind Power Limited in Mozambique to come up with FPA, an agreement, a purchase agreement for renewable energy. Isn't it something wonderful, isn't it? And to produce electricity. Okay? But then it took a while for these people to realize this land was gone, but they were not consulted. But even under the old constitution, it was their land. The issue of public interest had to be considered by the county, but it was not considered, it was not discussed. And an NGO came up, helped them go to court, and they won. Did they win? Whose land is this anyway? For 150,000 acres, that's a lot of land, right? Where they could be grazing their cattle, their camels, isn't it? And importing them. But there was no discussion about the implication of this intervention. The financial implication of this. I don't know how many economics we have in the room. And whether this would trickle development to them. A few watchmen have been employed from their community. But I understand a camel goes for, is it $1 million in Saudi Arabia? A mature one. So this was not considered. What was considered is this. There were some equity partners who are coming up with this project, and doubts are being raised that it was actually not necessary because it's very expensive. The excessive electricity from the grid of this production is going to cost Kenya Power, which is going to be loaded in our bills. The last case I'm going to illustrate what is happening is right here in Lamu, Kiunga Island. We have 5 conflicting interests. We have the current government, which has sectorial programs in the area for its attractive location near the Lapsot corridor. Those from Kenya know what I'm talking about. Secondly, we have 30,000 residents who have been living here before everybody else came, who are claiming ancestral claims to this land, but they are living in ruins, okay? Then we have the Kiunga Marine Reserve. Kenya WS has come up with protection of 2 things, the fragile biodiversity and the endangered turtle species, and then it has come up with a gazettement of the island to be protected, so they should get out. Then we have the private investors attracted to the unique tourism attraction who have illegally been allocated chunks of land and build wonderful hotels. They are investors, okay? So those are the conflicting issues. So here we have a law which we should apply, but we have all these conflicting issues. There's the informal settlement of these people. The government owes them, and they should be settled. There's also the consideration of public purpose and public utilities, which have to be considered, and they are crucial now. How do we resolve this? Now, I'm going to look at the context of our management mechanisms of land, the current one. And I will illustrate this with 3 examples to show why it is irresponsible to be constrained by a piece of paper which we call a title. The focus should be more about access to this land and the use of this land to make sure that the resources benefit the people who own the land. Otherwise, if they don't benefit those people, they will benefit somebody else, isn't it? And that is the person who owns the land. You might have the jetty, the paper, but if the money coming from the source of production throughout the value chain system up to the marketing goes to somebody else, then you are being managed. And those are the things we should be looking at. Now, number 1, let me look at the issue of inclusivity. I can go on and on about this, but let me just narrow it down to a few things. Now, when we look at the issue of inclusivity, we are looking at competing interests, like the ones I've just illustrated about the Kiunga Island. We are looking at not just economical consideration, but we are looking at cultural and social considerations, and sometimes even spiritual, because some of these land, you find places where people actually used to worship. We are also looking at technical expertise, innovative ways through which we can change our livelihoods. We are not that vulnerable. We can do that. And I know my friend there from, what is the name of the organization? You deal with education? Kenya Connect, and others. We are also looking at the issue of mediation, and we are looking at legislation. Now, in Kenya, the National Land Commission, under Section 19 of the Land Act, has a very clear framework of how they should come up with regulations to make sure that people benefit, even in the context of conservation. It also has a very good framework to make sure that people who are displaced, people who are squatters, even those who are displaced because of disaster, are settled. But do you know that even up to date, have not been able to come up with these regulations. It is not a priority and it's not funded and it has never been done. Many other regulations have been done, but this one has not been done. The other regulations which have not been done is, you remember those who are Kenyans, there was this talk about maximum and minimum acreage of land. That one has not been done. All the others have been done. Now, as for whether these are implemented or not is another question altogether, with different conflict of issues like the ones you have seen, and also many others. Now, the other area which I want to look at is the area of regulatory control. When we are looking at whose land is it anyway? Under Article 69, you find that our Constitution protects the intellectual property and indigenous knowledge in biodiversity and genetic resources. But what is happening right now, we have had a number of bills and laws which are coming up, which are regulating this, which are controlling this. Let me give you just a few examples. Those of you who are Kenyans, did you know that it is a crime to exchange, sell, uncertified and unregistered seeds? You have to use certified seeds. And you can be imprisoned for 2 years or fined up to 1 million. That is the Seed and Plant Varieties Act. There are people who have gone to court about this. There is also a new bill which is coming up. It's called the Horticultural Crops Bill. Seeds, sorry, seeds. There is the Horticultural Crops Bill of 2020 that will discourage land use by the smallholder farmers. Let me just give you a few and safety standards. Now, who can hardly survive with the little money she has? Now, consider the fact that the farmer in Europe receives incentives, but this one farmer in Europe receives incentives, but this one is something. Now, food security can imply you have the money to buy it, okay? So in Africa, what has been happening is this: you get the borrowed money, you get the food aid, you get to buy food from elsewhere, from Ukraine, you get to buy the wheat. So you have food security. But what we should be looking for, is what you'll find in the French government. They don't talk about food security, they talk about food sovereignty. Big difference. So what happens in Africa? Here in Kenya, we are growing what we do not consume, and then we are buying what we consume. So we get corn from Mexico, sugar from where? Wheat from Ukraine. Then we struggle to plant coffee, tea, to produce the British tea, Italian cappuccino. Then Angola and Nigeria, our highest producers of oil. I understand in Angola, 80% of gasoline comes from outside. Nigeria, all of it. Then you go to South Korea, and they are making most of their money through petroleum and coffee products. Do they plant coffee? So, sovereignty means what the Europeans did in the Treaty of Rome in 1955. Make sure that they are supported to grow core food products. Before that, did you know that 100% of their food was coming from where? The colonies. So is it true that we can't produce our food? So lastly, let me wrap this up by looking at 3 areas in which we can change this narrative. Very briefly, we should be looking at how we use our budget, okay? Where I see it at National Land Commission, solutions through mediation. Like the case I gave you, the one of Turkana. We were given 1 year by the court to map out the actors who have different responsibilities. We would have been able to map out the different interests, the different solutions, which we are provided for in the law, but we were not budgeted for it. It was not a priority. Project, whether it's for, is it necessary? And is the cost of intervention equal to the cost the people will lose? In fact, our Community Land Act is very clear on these issues. The community is supposed to be compensated for royalties. Mind you, I don't know whether you realize, with carbon credit, those people who are living there, the indigenous people who are living there. So they're supposed to be paid royalties for that. Secondly, we are very clear this. Actually, it's control. The county should be a party to the contract of these people to protect them. But then the Community Land Act is very clear. The social, cultural, economical, environmental issues should be facilitated for any negative effects if this contract is abandoned. It's not happening. The other issue I want to bring to your attention is on structural interdicts. This is for the lawyers in the room. We had a discussion last week on climate justice with the Environment and Land Court judges in Eldoret. It was very interesting, and this is continuing. Now, we have a case of, we call it the Me Too Bill case of the Supreme Court, which has relied on international law to find that the state is responsible for the socio-economic rights of all its citizens. It also found that courts can innovatively issue structural interdict orders to allow a court to. So the Commission can innovatively seek specific and determined period of time after declaration of this solution in its complex land administration and management function. It can also rely on the state responsibility criteria in its determinations. State actors that fail in their responsibilities can be charged for criminal offenses or fined to compensate for the failure for non-performance. We have a case like that where somebody was told to compensate for giving an illegal title, to compensate the person who was given the title by a civil court, 4 million. So that is emerging jurisprudence coming out of our court. But this will be more possible if we have legislated workflows. Those from Kenya know that people are always in court fighting about their different jurisdictions. Another area I want to bring to your attention is the area of collective regional bargaining. Now, if we are united as Africans, and that is why it's an honor to speak in a forum like this, and this is a seed I want us to go thinking about, how can we leverage on some of our resources, which include critical minerals for the just transition, young people, which is a big resource here in Kenya and also in the rest of Africa. And, well, we have sunshine to support the entire value chain manufacturing products, isn't it, in Africa? Now, proposals have been put forward by different Pan-Africanists. But what if we came together and bargained? You remember the story of Gaddafi. I'm not saying I'm supporting him or anything. I'm just saying, he said, we stayed for years without using our oil, and we were okay. So you take this price or leave it. And he was able to take Libya to be an economic giant by 2011. Now, what if we came up and said, okay, give us your technology. We increase our research, our post-harvest management systems, our marketing infrastructure, our agricultural mechanization, our provision of credit and value chain development. And we will come up with a broad-based group of people who are consuming your products from China. For example, I'm picking China because US and EU right now is closing doors to high-value chain products from China. So both China and us gain. But that would have to be a collective bargain by Africans, not just one country. And there are many other ways we can do this. Lastly, but not least, there is what they are trying to do in the example I gave you of Kyoga Island. It's called mixed-use planning. Now, if you talk to our counties in the land sector about planning, they will tell you it's not important, and they won't budget for it. The Commissioner oversees planning, and we have been trying to make sure that every county has their own county special plans. Now, why is this so important? If in the case of LAM, mixed-use planning is used, it will address the 5 competing interests I gave you. How will this be possible? There will be inclusivity. The interest of the communities will be considered in a mediation process. The interest of the county will be considered. The interest of these people who grabbed land, we call it land grabbing in Kenya, will be considered. If possible, maybe they can pay something back. And the turtle will be considered. So there will be a coordinated that in the short term, in the long term, in the medium term, any project's value which is considering all these interests. And they will be factored in. Because protection of the biodiversity doesn't for their livelihood. What if this was also factored in and increased so that they can earn more, but they are told some scientific ways of fishing in such a way they do not finish the fish? So that is the last thought I'm throwing out there for people to think about when it comes to answering the question, whose land is it anyway?
East. She's been brilliantly supportive on many issues in Kenya, laying down early day motions and basically writing letters to government, which she'll mention, particularly around historical land injustices, and who's going to join us shortly. In fact, I think he's joined us now, and he is the Dean of the Law Faculty.
Apologies, because I'm not able to get my screen on, so I do hope that you can at least hear me. Is that okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. I mean, I'm joining you all the way from the UK, and I'm delighted to be able to join you at short notice. I wasn't expected to be at your event. It's as you gather in the struggle for too long, I certainly lives of millions from the fertile land of your Rift Valley to the lush coastlines of Lama. You know, the spectacular land grabs looms large. British colonialism was not merely an administrative imposition. It was actually a land, your heritage, and all of our, impacted on the lives of many today. 80% of the arable land. That is grotesque inequality, and it wasn't an accident. It was by design. The colonial powers sowed seeds of division and dispossession, leaving Kenya with a fractured society where the wealthy few hold dominion over vast of land while the majority struggle out a living on the margins. So let's be very clear. This is not just commission, has been tasked with addressing these injustices. The promise of restitution and reform ring hollow when confronted with the stark reality of continued land conflicts and indeed evictions that I keep reading about. They are the architects of a system that prioritizes eye to the cries of the dispossessed who have perpetrated a cycle of exploitation and exclusion. So let us remember, as I'm sure you do, that the fight for land justice is not just about reclaiming what was lost, it's about building a future where every Kenyan has a stake in their own land, where the fruits of our labor, your labor, are shared equitably, and where the ghosts of colonialism, imperialism, are finally laid to rest. And I guess we just cannot mince words. Those who history will judge.
Yeah, but contribution is extremely welcome and appropriate. Could I ask the next short contribution from Professor Duncan Ojwang? And I think we saw you having breakfast a moment ago, so I hope you finished, but I know you, so you're okay. And can I say, Professor Ojwang has been
in the 15th century. If you Google and search a lot of purple bulls, these are the letters written by Pope that was given. So, for example, if you look at the native land in the US, Columbus is flying there. He has a very important document, none other than purple bull, that go to the land, and if you find a non-Christian